police force, Mr. Abdul Malik Domingo. Abdul Malik Domingo and I go back actually close on to 20 years now. I first met him in 2001 when he accosted me as I was coming out of the Durban Convention Center, and he told me to take my shirt off or t-shirt off. And that incident was quite amusing. I was, I think, with my friend Faisal, if you remember rightly, Abdul. We were coming out because we had a problem with the UN security officer who refused to let us into the convention center because we had what she termed to be a highly political t-shirt on. And I think it had a picture of Muhammad al-Durra, and they took objection to that.
Yes.
So she insisted. Then, as I wanted to go in half naked from the top up, she then said, well, you can't go into the convention center because you will offend the ministers who are here if you don't have a shirt on. I said, well, you asked me to take my t-shirt off. I appreciate that you wanted to see my excellent body, but, you know, I mean, what do you want me to do? She took umbrage to that, of course. I think she was Norwegian, and decided to kick Faisal and I out. And then as we were walking out, Sergeant Domingo, as he was then, accosted us in the street saying, hey, you two, come here. So we turn up to him and he says, take the shirt off. I said, I don't understand what's going on in Durban these days. Everyone wants us to strip naked. What's going on? Is this a UN conference against racism, or is it the porn convention? But anyway, Sergeant Domingo wanted a shirt. Apparently he wanted my shirt. I said, I promised that I would get him one. And we lived up to that promise, Faisal and I, and we actually went to your mother's house, I think in Morningside, was it? In Morningside. Right. And we had a lovely braai, as you say in South Africa. So that's, and since that day, we actually kept in touch. And I really, really class him as a very dear friend, a very interesting character, a very genuine character. And the thing that Sergeant Domingo and I have in common is he is of a Pathan heritage, which is exactly the same as my children, because my children are half Pathan, of course, aren't they?
Yes.
So, yeah, so that's what we had in common. And he is joining us today so that he can actually talk to us about his experiences during the liberation struggle against apartheid. Abdul was instrumental in the liberation movement. And he will talk about his experience during apartheid, what it was like growing up under an apartheid regime, especially since he was married to an Afrikaans lady, I believe, if I'm right, and how they had to live under the specter where people, white Europeans, had to be separated from non-whites. And he'll talk us also through as to how apartheid eventually broke down, what South Africa became, and his experiences generally of crime and combat of crime before and after the end of the liberation struggle. So that's the introduction, and I'll leave the floor to you, Abdul. If you can talk to us, first of all, growing up in an apartheid system, what it was like, and how did you try and cope with it?
No, thanks. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum to you and your viewers. Jazakallah for having me. It's indeed a pleasure. And yes, I hope, and you shouldn't have taken offense to removing the shirt. It's a standard dress code in South Africa. You know, when you're in the jungle, you do as the people here do, you know. So no offense to be taken. But I see you have brushed up on the muscles since. You've toned the body down. No, I mean, you know, the most important thing is, you know, they call us the Rainbow Nation. And it's truly rainbow down in South Africa. I just want to start with something interesting which I discovered the other day. I was going through a PhD, a doctoral research thesis that was done by a student, a Malay student in Cape Town. And then I discovered reading through this that, as you all know, Jan van Riebeeck set up his fort in the Western Cape in 1652. The problem they had there is, having set up the fort in the Western Cape, they required to receive or be able to procure vegetable. And the challenge they had is that the Hottentots or the Khoisan, the San people in the Western Cape at the time, they were hunter-gatherers. So the challenge they had now is to acquire labor that they could now use to start vegetation, to start growing their crop, etc. So they were cleared by the VOC to conduct a voyage to Madagascar in around 1650. Slaves, as they called them back then. I guess if you were white back in the day, you would be called an employee. But if you were a person of color, you were called a slave, with reduced rights. So they managed to procure the services
You're slightly breaking up, Abdul.
of certain individuals from Maryland. And then they made a second voyage in August. And then I discovered in August of 1654, when the vessel returned to Cape Town, on board the vessel was one known as Domingo, his wife, his kid, and two other slaves. So I managed to trace the heritage back there in the Cape to about 1654. Yes, 1654. Quite exciting, I must say. But then, coming from a Malay background, my dad being from Cape Town, then my mum being Patan, as we said, the notorious Patan people, the people who carry the blood of Genghis. Yes, them having married and my dad having eventually come with my grandfather from Cape Town District 6, which fell to the hands of the apartheid impacts, meaning District 6 was cleared. It was under the Group Areas Act. People of color were removed from District 6. They came and they set up in Johannesburg, in Fortsburg, and then eventually from Fortsburg to Durban. And obviously, yes, the story then, my probability became greater then as he came to Durban, then meeting my mom. And my dad acquired a house in what was considered Group Area Indian South Africa or Durban. That's in the Shallcross area, which is close to the Chatsworth area. And he was caught out for what they called, I think they called them the not the red ants, blackjacks. They were called blackjacks, these guys. They went around neighborhoods looking for people of color who were in the wrong designation, not designated area. They weren't in the correct designated area. So if you were colored, you had to be in a colored neighborhood. Or if you were grouped under colored, like Malays were. So my book, very quickly. So I'm stopping there where my dad is now in this house in Shallcross, close to Chatsworth. And then our ID books, being Malay, had a category for Malay. So back in the days, our ID books had a 00 categorization, which was white, 01, which was Cape colored, 02, which was Malay, and then you went on 03, 05 was Asian or Indian. And then, as everyone knows, that with the Bantu sons, with the TBVCs, they had what was called dom passes back in the day. So yes, with our ID books being 024, they were told, my dad was told, listen, you're in the wrong neighborhood, my friend. You're gonna have to up and leave here, and we're gonna relocate you in a township called Wentworth. So Wentworth is situated close to the sea, beautiful area, a stone's throw from the sea, and but close to two refineries. So Malays were then grouped with colored. The bigger grouping being colored, Malays were then grouped with colored. And then I was 2 years old, and we moved into Wentworth, and and this new this new journey began in Wentworth, growing up in Wentworth. We had all kinds of things, kinds of looking people. When I got to high school, I laughed with, we'd always speak because we had guys who looked Indian. We had guys who looked African. We had a large majority of kids in school who looked white. I mean, the full package, blonde hair, green eyes, you name it. And then a friend of mine, his name was Russell. And Russell used to tell us, listen, guys, I think you should stop complaining, yeah, I am. I look Indian, right? I live in a colored area. I'm classified colored. And my surname's White. So can you imagine what it's like for me, looking Indian, living in a colored area, classified colored, with a surname that's White? My surname is White. So he said he's got a greater dilemma than all of us. You can imagine, yeah. And very, I should say, exciting times ahead, primary school, the bullying, being characterized according to your appearance, and then whether we like it or not, I think through socialization theories, through environments that people are grown up in, you have discussions that adults maybe undertake where certain groups are considered to be weaker than other groups. And kids may overhear these conversations, come to school and think, oh, here's a guy who has got straight black hair and he looks like he could have some Indian in him, or, basically everyone thought Indian. They never thought Pathan, Pakistan. And I mean, little did they know, having Pathan blood in you meant that you were on the border, you're borderline psychotic, you know what I'm saying? So you were classified then, and then I don't mean you. I speak for myself, Osama.
Yeah, I don't want the missus to take umbrage.
So obviously at school now you have certain people identifying you as possibly the weak link. Let's try this individual. Let's see if we can get away with bullying him. And I think the greatest thing for me, and which shaped my character, is standing up to the bullying then. Standing up to the bullying. I mean, I ended up with being stitched up in primary school, grade 3, having my left eye cut open. Like every day was a challenge. It was Jumanji, in primary school. And things got really bad in that school, and my dad had to shift me to another school. And I think when we got to that school, I ended up being high up the food chain. Now, with my personality that had unfolded, and I was no more considered by others to be lower down the food chain. So I already started commanding some respect. And yes, and then it was high school, and I think in high school everything changed. Obviously, we were first generation, I'd say. If you look at it, Wentworth is obviously, certain parts of Wentworth was army barracks. They call that section the Drake section, which was part prison camp, part hospital, part army camp from back in the days, and then turned out into this colored neighborhood with additional housing being built. But I'd say from the schools that we entered in, there was probably a generation before us, maybe, that went to some of the schools, but we were in there, almost the earliest generations to be in that school. So I gather that as I was going through this journey at school, a lot started to change. There was more acceptance from people. Colored people in general, started accepting that by being colored does not put us into a specific categorization of appearance. We are a real mixed bunch, but we all identify as colored. And I think, yes, in high school things eased up, but like I say, a wonderful journey getting into school. And then obviously at school is where being exposed to, I had a very good friend, Wayne Jean-Pierre. I mean, how's his surname? Jean-Pierre.
Very
Wayne
fresh.
Jean-Pierre. Yes, Wayne Jean-Pierre. Um, he was in my grade in grade 8. That's first year of high school. Very very activist oriented. Um, Obviously, at that time, what we started with, one of our primary efforts were to refuse to sing the national anthem at the assembly at school. So you had kids lining up in the morning, and they were all getting ready to start the day. And obviously, you had to sing the entire anthem as the flag was raised. And we refused to. We then went to another strategy of protest by humming the freedom song. Then they removed us from the assembly and placed us on the other side of the quadrant, where we hummed a little louder, and eventually in a classroom where we hummed even louder. So that was our protest. My friend Wayne was expelled in grade 11, unfortunately, because of his activity at school that he was caught out with. And yes, that was one of the prices that he suffered.
But
Yeah,
can
but
I, but can I ask this, Abdul? Sorry for interrupting. I mean, the school. I take it the hierarchy and the teachers would what be Afrikaans, but the children be colored, or how is it? How was the actual regime enforced? I mean, would the apartheid regime put colored teachers to basically humiliate other colored students? I mean, how did the actual system work?
we had predominantly colored teachers. I think when I reached high school, that generation, the earlier generation before us, quite a number of them had now become teachers. But then amongst those teachers as well, we had brave, notable leaders, forerunners of our struggle amongst the teacher group as well. So I'd say, I must say, and I'm not going to mention names here, but amongst the teachers, you had those that seemed to be very loyalist to the National Party government or to the apartheid government, to those apartheid proponents and the system. They were very loyal to the system. And when I say loyal to the system, we were governed by the House of Delegates, the tricameral political system, which means you've got the parliament, which was your whites, and then you had the House of Representatives, which were the Indians that governed the Indian community, and the House of Delegates, which governed the Indian community, and the House of Representatives, which governed the colored community. Now,
So
from the
what did the
community,
Africans do?
the Africans were Bantustans. You had your TBVCs. So in the TBVCs, your Transkei, Basotho, Venda, Ciskei areas, they were self-governing territories. So basically, it's like your Gaza of today, or whatever it is you want to call it. It's
Wow.
you confined to that area, and you are given a curfew within which you have to leave any other part of South Africa other than your territory. And even if you're out of your normal territory, they almost took stock of who came from which Bantustan. And if you were found in an area which was outside of your Bantustan, and I refer to that word with just for the purpose of discussion, it was obviously it's a very oppressive word, very discriminatory word. So people would be arrested. If you were African, a local, you would have to carry your dom pass with you wherever you went. So at any given time, even during the day, you could be stopped and asked to produce your dom pass.
And who
I
is the
think
policing in those areas? Would it be the Afrikaans or would it be the Africans themselves or hired labor?
it was almost a combination. So your security police, being the elite services of the apartheid government, they would play quite, how should we say, major roles in the training and to an extent supervision planning of the efforts of the KZP, KwaZulu Police. KwaZulu police under the KwaZulu government. A thing from that I remember is during meetings where we have had mass rallies, youth meetings, was the KZP together with other police forces, so meaning our security police that would perform a raid on the area where the meeting was being held, and then we had to scatter. We had to run to freedom and hide, duck, and look for whatever means we could to get away, because being victim of it, you could be subjected to some nasty beatings at that time.
Can I ask then this follow-up question? So the KwaZulu government would have been a African-led government, and would I be right to say Mangosuthu Buthelezi at that time?
That's right. That's right. So there was obviously funding, going to the TBVCs to sustain home building and the rest, So I guess there was a sort of status quo. The status quo meant that brothers were being oppressed, and there was no freedom. And again, and I think we had that discussion recently in saying that the freedom of the person, this was it. There was no freedom of the person because we all fell into categories, and the categorization was so strict that it meant geographical location. You were categorized according to geographical location. And then obviously you had your Immorality Act. Your Immorality Act was the one that said, Osama, well, listen, you can go there to the beach, but remember, don't frequent that portion of the beach. It's for whites only. And dare not look at the white chicks, eh? And because if we catch you with one of them, you're going to be in serious trouble. That's prohibited under the Immorality Act,
Trying to keep the genetic pool pure, as it were, was it?
Yes, yes, probably. I mean, they should have told Genghis. They should have told Genghis about that earlier on.
No, absolutely.
As we know, 70% of Nash people have got his genes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Then help me with this. So essentially, the way it would actually work is, rather than skin color, it seemed to have been what you would effectively regard as a genetic type of pooling of people. So, for example, as you said, although they were regarded as people of color, some of them would have been blonde-haired and blue-eyed. So essentially, it was more to do with their genetic makeup. But how did the actual apartheid system designate somebody? So, for example, if I have somebody who was blue-eyed, blonde-haired, how did he ended up being defined as a person of color?
It's strange you should ask that question. I'm not sure whether it was Mr. Riyad Musa, Dr. Riyad Musa. I think you may know him as a stand-up comedian. Not sure whether it was him or Trevor Noah. And they actually said, it was actually dangerous back in the days when you went down to Home Affairs and had your ID made up. Because apparently it wasn't easy. There was no thorough DNA testing mechanism, etc., in place. So basically what they would look at is the hair covering of the individual. So in front of you, you had a guy with green eyes, blue eyes, or whichever, white skin. But what they would do is stick a pen or a pencil in his hair. And if the pencil fell out, he's white. And if the pencil stuck there, sorry, brother, you colored. And that means now you can't stay at mommy's house at night if mommy's white, because you just been classified colored. You better go to Wentworth or Newlands East, else you're in serious trouble. So
it was just purely on the hair, was it?
You know what? I think to some extent, maybe they have. I think that's just Dr. Riyad Musa and Trevor Noah having their go at apartheid and its systems. I'm hoping for my sake. I can't tell you offhand. I didn't delve too deep in that, but it stumps me to know what kind of mechanism they would have used. Perhaps family tree. I recall that back in the days, my dad supported a soccer team called Durban City. As you know, back in South Africa, back in the days, the NFL, which was the white soccer league, was a very strong league. In fact, at that time, you had where the pound was weaker than the rand. So we had many English players, Scottish players, coming down to South Africa and playing in the NFL. Guys of like Johnny Haynes, who else? I mean, there were some big names, all English internationals that played their soccer at club level in South Africa. But there was this one player, Rodney Kitchen. Rodney Kitchen was a white guy. I know him to be a white guy. Obviously, he was on that field, and being on that field and being able to play meant he was a white guy. But he had a Michael Jackson or early Jackson 5 afro, you know? So if I think about that, I'm going to say that perhaps there was another mechanism, because definitely if Rodney Kitchen went to Home Affairs and they stuck a pencil in his afro, it definitely wasn't going to fall out. So maybe there was some kind of other mechanism, because Rodney Kitchen was classified white, but great soccer player. So I'm not bringing Rodney down. He was a great soccer player. But I just want to come to something else that you raised. You spoke about the groupings. Why the groupings? I think this is a psychological, a strategic, psychologically based method of control. Divide and rule, not necessarily divide and conquer, because conquer took place a while back, but divide and rule. In fact, I think it's important to say as well, is that the knowledge of the little boxes was quite advanced, because amongst our black, our I'm going to call them natives of South Africa, but that's another debate, because sometimes you have some unlettered people who would say that, you guys don't deserve to be here. This is not your home. Go back to India or go back to where you came from, etc. But that's another debate, because at the end of the day, if I can tell you that my forefathers arrived here in 1654, and the Khoisan were the natural people of the Western Cape, and knowing that there were intermarriage and the communities developed from there, from interrelations, etc. We know that a vast majority of what people would consider non-Africans, non-natives, are more native than some people who call themselves natives. So, but that's another discussion. Just to say that the apartheid government, what they knew was, amongst the Indians, you had Hindus, North Indians, you had Tamils, South Indians, you had Gujis, you had Telugus, you had Muslim, and you had non-Muslim, and they knew that each place meant and gave them opportunity for divide and conquer. So each would watch over the other. As we had the bigger groupings, which was colored African, Indian, and your Bantustans, etc., you would find that the design or positioning, and I mean, this is strategic, maybe it's fallible, maybe I stand to be corrected, but you would find that your colored neighborhoods, your people of color, their townships were situated on the periphery of the city center and inner suburbs. And then beyond the townships, where your Indians and coloreds were your Africans. So you had a hierarchy of geographical spatial positioning of your populations, meaning blacks on the outside, closer in Indians and coloreds, and then in the center, you'd have your whites. So it was designed that if the popo hit the fan, there was a level of prior warning, time to react, before the elite group would become victim to a mob attack, to a mass action.
That's actually quite interesting, because I think, I mean, if you look at Europeans have generally done that, and certainly authority has generally done that. They play one group of ethnic minorities against the other. I'll give you an example. For example, in 2011, when they were rioting in the city center of Birmingham, and in order to make sure that the that the actual central business district of Birmingham would not be affected. What the police deliberately did was push predominantly West Indian rioters out towards the fringes, out of the city center into the Asian districts of Birmingham, so that effectively what would happen is, instead of having their economic interest damaged, what would happen is then you'll allow the Pakistanis to fight it out with the West Indian youths. And that's essentially what ended up happening. And rather than focusing on what the issue was, which was the mistreatment of ethnic minorities by the establishment, or the perceived mistreatment as it was in 2011, you know, literally the early predecessor to Black Lives Matter. Yes. What they ended up doing was setting the Muslim community against the West Indian community. And if you look, and these were the communities whose previous generation actually stood shoulder to shoulder in fighting racism on the streets of Britain. So they actually played them off against one another. And the interesting thing that you also caught my attention here is your idea that there are certain sections within the Indian community who always saw themselves to be superior to their fellow Indian community. For example, yeah, you're right. The Brahmins would see themselves as being of a higher caste than the Tamils, who are of a lower caste. Why? Because ultimately, you and I know that Tamils had darker skin, which then brings us on to this question. Were the Europeans themselves intrinsically made to believe that they were superior, or was white supremacy born out of, generally speaking, the acceptance of non-whites of their superior nature? I mean, I always say it's a chicken and egg situation. I don't think actually white supremacy would exist had it not been the part belief of non-whites that in fact whites are superior to themselves. And you will see that in many a Muslim region. I mean, essentially, you go to a place like Lebanon. Lebanon will worship a European. Why? Because they have fairer skin. You will experience that even as simple as going to an arranged marriage. The first thing your mother would look for is somebody who was fair-skinned. She wouldn't go for somebody who was the darker skinned. Yes. So ultimately, white supremacy is actually also a disease within the ethnic minorities themselves, because they believe in it.
Definitely. And I mean, you know, that stigma continues today. It continues today. Yes, I must say that at this point in time, in modern day South Africa, and I'm going to say so-called democratic, by vocab or by word, not by true and total action. There are lots of mixed marriages. So your perception of the white being the choice of preference, or being the respect to be respected of preference, is dissipating. But I think where it is lingering is more within communities, within previously segregated communities. So amongst your Indians, perhaps even amongst your coloreds. I mean, I was in a conversation the other day, and people were making reference to a kid that was born, and obviously mentioning that he's going to be a little bit, darker. He's going to have the challenge of darker skin. So I, to myself, thought, why the challenge of darker skin? Where does darker skin pose a challenge to you, So, yes, the white man was very strategic in what he did. I think there was a lot of some serious conditioning that he did during the apartheid time in elevating the status of white skin and white categorization. You know that in Cape Town, at the House of Parliament, I can't think of the street name, but there's still that bench to remind us about the past that says whites only. And the other bench, street bench, that says non-whites. And I don't know if you weren't in South Africa at that time, we had buses, and the buses that would travel the route, the public service buses that would travel the route to Wentworth, etc., were green in color, called the green mambas. And the white guys had this powder blue, beautifully painted, multi-tone bus, with, all right, to some extent, because of giving the people a second grade, third grade kind of service, people never appreciated it. To do the psychological assessment of it, perhaps the scraping, etching in of names on the wooden seats, on the back of wooden seats, and perhaps damaging the cushioning on the seat. Maybe some of it, I'm going to say, it's difficult for me to say it's culturally based. I think due to your categorization, due to the government's method of giving third and second grade services to people of color, and the fact that there has always been some kind of awareness that there was a struggle against this white rule and white supremacy, that some people saw this damaging or this act as an act of rebellion. So your white buses always look perfect, the seats were lovely. And that was another one of our activities, was to jump into the white buses. Oh, it was quite a sight. It's a pity we never had cell phones then. We'd have some lovely videos to share, to just see the expression, it was as though your brownness was going to become contagious, if you stood there long enough. People would suddenly turn brown. I mean, some people actually got so pale, it looked like they were going to suffer a serious cardiac arrest. It was quite a sight. But yeah, sadly so, we never had video cameras back then to record some of these actions.
Is that because they were conditioned by propaganda, or was it just, I to be fair, living in Britain, despite what many perceptions were, for example, the perception amongst the ethnic minorities or the black and minority ethnic groups is that if you go to working class areas such as in Consett up in Northumberland, most people there are racist. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth, because when I turned up to Northumberland, whether it was areas such as Sunderland or Consett or even Newcastle, they actually at times treated me much more fairly and a lot more with respect than members of my own community. So that is that because, and I often say that I suspect until they get to know you, there's always that reservation, because the actual propaganda that's fed into their heads is these people are different. They represent a threat to you. But once there is that, shall we say, mixing and getting to know you, those stereotypes very quickly dissipate. And you will tend to find, generally speaking, and as I say, I don't like to make generalization, but when I went to those areas of England, which I would have never done, and that's why I say I was privileged to be a barrister, because that actually showed me parts of Britain which from my background I would have never seen. You realize that essentially it doesn't matter what their skin color is or religion or whatever background it is. The issues are more to do with economics than to do with race. Whether you're white working class, or whether you are Asian, or whether you are West Indian, the injustice to those communities is the same. It is actually economic disenfranchisement. It's got nothing to do with race. It's to do with the fact that I mean, I've come to the conclusion after you mix and you go into these communities, essentially, when it comes to money, people have the same religion, race, ethnicity, and politics. And you probably see it. I mean, one thing I did notice, as I say, my first trip was in 2001. Come back in 2005, 2006, as the days of the, shall we say, racial apartheid were waning. It's like Penguin Beach in Cape Town, just outside Simonstown, I think, that area. In 2001,
Maisenberg, isn't it Maisenberg?
Musenberg, yeah. I mean, in 2001, you'd freely see people go in there, and predominantly Africans who would probably, because of the way Cape Town was, it was effectively, Cape Town was a African free city, and certainly the surroundings would have been. They'd be next to the airport in the Cape Flats and those areas. But to go there in 2001, people freely could go to the beach and enjoy the penguins. Back in 2006, 2005, unless you paid, I think it was 100 Rand, well, it's coming from Britain, it isn't that much, but to the average African who's come out from the Cape Flats, that's a lot of money. So what it seems to have happened is that the racial apartheid was being slowly replaced by economic apartheid.
Yes. I think what's important here as well for me to say is the experiences now with going onto the buses, etc. Those were still during my youth, still whilst at school, where we would travel often by bus during my university years. But very important for me to mention is when I joined the Durban City Police, which then became the Durban Metro Police. I must say the culture, the ethic, the code in terms of the standing orders of that department was that they are apolitical. Yes, there were criticisms about the hierarchical structure, the organizational structure, and the fact that predominantly you had, white folk in more leadership positions, etc. They were going through a transition. They were adjusting. And lower down the ladder, you had adjustments being made with people of color being brought in. But what I must say, though, with the group that I joined, I think in our group of 14, we had probably 8 to 9 white guys. But the cohesion amongst the group, I don't think anybody saw color. The way our social interaction, I mean, they did strange things, man. These buggers, I wear dentures, and they removed my dentures and handcuffed me to the desk until the lecture sergeant came in. And then he asked me questions, but I was too scared to open my mouth to tell him what the problem was because I never had my dentures in my mouth. And then the buggers rugby tackled me. And I'm talking about the entire 13 of them on top of me on the ground, just to show me a point, because I acted colored in the group, I wanted to tell them, I'm from Wentworth, don't mess with me. We come from the hood. It was just a joke. So what they did was they taught me a lesson. They all put me down. But, I must say it was a totally refreshing experience. I mean, today I have guys that were with me in that group that are in Portugal, that are in Fiji, that are in the UK, etc. We still keep in touch. It's a brotherhood. I learned, having come from the struggle, being part of a brotherhood there, I somehow learned to fit into a new brotherhood, being the Durban City Police. And in that group, I must say, there was nothing. I could not feel. I can't tell you there's a moment where I felt. I was more driving my difference as a joke in the group, telling them I'm a braino, don't mess with me, I'll stick you. That's the word we use, for stab. I will stab you. It was just a joke. And
it's quite interesting thought. I mean, yeah, it seems that maybe humans have a tendency to collate in a tribe, and tribes can be a tribal system can actually be as simple as the police force. So you'd see them as part of your own sort of tribe. I mean, for me, my tribe is Liverpool Football Club. So essentially, it doesn't matter who's standing there next to you on the terraces. You don't see them for their racial or ethnic background or religious background. All you are
unless it's a Man United supporter. Sorry to disturb you. Unless it's a Man United supporter.
Well, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I you know, as the famous banner said at Anfield, you know, don't bomb Iraq, nuke Manchester.
Yeah, no, definitely. You know what's amusing today, and to fast forward to when my kids were at school, and then you go into a social setting, you know, a place of entertainment, and you see a fight break out, and perhaps it's a white guy having an argument with an African guy, and you check them tussling and so forth. And the most amusing thing to see is a black guy come over, and you think, this white guy is in trouble now. There's two black dudes here now. And next thing, this black dude in a very white Durban North accent, you know, and the other as well has a Durban North accent, tells a black guy how he's messing with his mate, and he takes his mate's part, and he gives the other black dude a slap on the head, and vice versa. You know, loyalties have shifted.
No, absolutely. You know, I mean, look, I'll give you an example. I think you remember it back in 2001 when we were in the conference against racism. There were some anti-Israeli rabbis. I think you remember the incident where one of them actually got assaulted by a member of the Israeli delegation. And yes, when it was reported to the UN police stood back and did nothing, even though the rabbis were being badly assaulted. And I remember it clearly when you arrived with your squad car to actually arrest the people who assaulted them, and the UN police tried to intervene to actually protect the people who assaulted these rabbis, and you took a stand, and you basically say, stand back, this is a matter for the Durban police, we have jurisdiction over this.
Yes.
And it just goes to show you how people actually discriminate, even what you would perceive to be a member of the same group, but it seems that they are focused on some sort of tribalism, essentially what they identify with.
Absolutely. We actually had a follow-up meeting after that incident. We said to the United Nations, as much as, for example, the exhibition center, the ICC, the Hilton Hotel, etc., became UN territory. So they argued that whilst we were on UN territory, which was during the conference, that is UN territory, we have to then accept that they are in authority and we have to follow their command. The problem is that as much as that is UN territory, it wasn't a self-sustaining island, meaning there was no prison, there was no courts, etc. So whether you like it or not, if somebody is arrested on the island site, they then would be transported into the South African legal system. Amongst other things, maybe there were United Nations violations, but they would be through the South African system, which would be supporting that efforts, the conference and their territory. So what we said is, what we wanted was a united approach.
Yeah.
Look, because generally what would
here, Abdul, I'll tell you why. We're running out of time. I'd actually like to continue this conversation because and probably sometime next week to actually get on to actually the way even potentially the UN's policing was discriminatory. So we'll get to how you resolve that problem.
Yes.
So listeners, Assalamu alaikum. As I say, it's a pleasure to have you and see you once more, Abdul, and look forward to seeing you next week so that we can continue.
No, definitely. It'll be my pleasure. I love talking and love chatting with you. We need you back in South Africa. We want to take your shirt off again, eh?
Inshallah, inshallah.
I mean.
Okay. Go well, my friend.
Assalamu alaikum to you and your
Alaikum
viewers.
salam. Okay, thank you.